Hi, and welcome to B2B Bytes. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Isiah Bollinger, CEO and co-founder of Trellis, a leading e-commerce solutions provider. Isiah has a deep passion for B2B e-commerce and runs arguably the world's top B2B e-commerce podcast. Welcome to the show, Isiah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you. Today, we're going to be discussing the topic of systems integration. It is a topic that often makes people's blood turn cold with fear, but it shouldn't. And hopefully by the end of this little discussion, they'll feel a little bit more comfortable about approaching their next project. Isiah, maybe to kick us off, why can systems integration seem so challenging? What are the challenges, especially in B2B, that businesses face?
Well, I think that most of these businesses are not inherently digitally savvy or technology first organizations. So, if you think about like an Amazon or Google, like that's their entire business. So for them, like that's very easy, right? They're the ones like leading the way on this stuff. And I think especially in B2B, most of these organizations, their core expertise is, sales, or as a distributor, where we go out and we sell, a bunch of vendor solutions to other people in my industry that want this, or they're really like sales organizations, or they're manufacturing organizations, and they're really good at making this piece of metal or this fastener or this maybe a car, and they're not, software architects, right? And so they don't have a lot of that, personnel in their business, or if they do, maybe they're for a very specific purpose. So I think a lot of these companies lack kind of like a high level systems architecture understanding of how all these systems should work together. And then also things are just changing so fast that what we would architect today I can tell you is very different than what we would have architect 3, 4, 5 years ago. So like every year we're constantly, even at Trellis, having to like kind of up our game in terms of how we would maybe architect a solution for a customer.
Makes sense. Do you think there's also more complexity in B2B, more systems to integrate? I'm thinking maybe there's a CPQ, there's a couple of PIMs with different data and different information in them. Do you see that often?
Yeah, I would definitely say that in B2B, there's generally more complexity around all of the systems that they need to operate than B2C. I mean, obviously, there's always exceptions, but I think on average, it's more complicated for a B2B company than a B2C company. And then on top of that, usually these B2B companies don't have a lot of people in IT or marketing, and marketing has become very technology, heavy. And so they, not only is it more complicated, they often have less, sophisticated talent than some of these B2C organizations that have been built around e-commerce for a long period of time, because I think it kind of took hold a little bit earlier on in B2C.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so if I'm a B2B manufacturer, distributor, I'm approaching a systems technology project, how should I approach integration? What are my goals? What should I think about? What are the different approaches that I could take?
Well, generally we like to think of how everything should work together, right? So I think the problem is most people just think of point to point, and so they build integration for this thing to that thing, and then this thing to that thing, and it's just kind of random, and they're doing it based on a specific problem, and they're not thinking about all the systems and how they work together. So the first thing we like to do is do kind of a basic. We use Lucidchart. There's many different kind of design tools for this, where we just map out all the systems and we maybe group them together. Like here's the marketing apps, and with BigCommerce especially, it's a little bit easier because you have this app ecosystem. Not everything has that, right? But and generally we include the things that are relevant from an e-commerce perspective or like buying experience. So we're not going to include like Zoom or like Slack. Like there are other systems that I would argue are like kind of relevant to the organization, but they're not necessarily needing to be integrated or integrated from like an e-commerce perspective. So we're generally looking at the major systems like ERP systems, which probably includes accounting. So if they don't have an ERP, it's probably like QuickBooks or Xero, or it's like a NetSuite. Maybe they have an order management system, or that could be the ERP system. And sometimes they have ERP system and order management. Maybe they have a PIM system, like you're saying, a CRM. There's usually about like at the most 5 or 6 core major systems. And then you have maybe 20 or 30 smaller apps like a Yotpo, or kind of some of these smaller solutions that maybe solve like a small problem from the e-commerce perspective. And then usually we try and look at whether we should bring in an iPaaS solution like a Sligo. Sligo is just a relationship we've had for a long time. We work really well with them. They're pretty affordable. There are other iPaasses, so we try and stay unbiased. Like, do your research, look at the iPaaS solutions. But once you're at a level of sophistication that iPaaS makes sense, you definitely should be looking at an iPaaS versus trying to custom integrate everything. iPaaS is a very long acronym for Integration Platform as a Service, but essentially it allows you to have kind of a simplified software that you can log in and see how everything's kind of integrated together without being a developer. So I could log in as a non-developer into Sligo, see all my connections, see how NetSuite's connected to Shopify or BigCommerce or Magento. I know this is very much a BigCommerce podcast, but I'm trying to paint the picture of that these things can work for many different systems. And then if in some cases iPaaS is like too sophisticated, so for smaller customers, so actually we have some pretty cool, interesting kind of mid-market companies that are new to B2B e-commerce that have selected BigCommerce, actually partly from listening to our podcast, because they learned that like it was just a good fit for where they were at. And then they came and found us, they found you. And in their case, they don't have the complexity yet for iPaaS. So an example of one of these is they have Acumatica. They're going with Acumatica and BigCommerce. And the app, as you know, being directly built for Acumatica and BigCommerce is getting better. And in that case, it's just a direct integration kind of makes sense. And there's just not a need yet for this like more complicated iPaaS. So direct integration is still fine, but I would consider that more on the lower end of complexity. I know that was a very long-winded answer, but it's a complicated topic, so it's hard to explain easily.
That was great. I was going to have to ask you to define what an iPaaS was, but you did that for us, which is great. So what I kind of take away there is, based on the complexity of your business, you should think about whether direct integrations meet your needs. And if not, an iPaaS could be a good route to go to bring all of that data together. And don't look at it from a point-to-point relationship. Think about your data as a whole and how it will move amongst all of these systems to build the best solution.
There's something I didn't mention that's really important is what is the source of truth? So the big thing that companies really don't think a lot about is you have all these different systems. And also one of the problems is that most of these systems can do some of the same things. So BigCommerce has a pretty good order management system. It's generally not used as an enterprise order management system. Like I'm sure most of your larger customers have an ERP or an order management system like a Fluent or something that's designed as an enterprise, or Manhattan, I think is like the big enterprise, right? But technically you can manage orders in BigCommerce, right? Or product data, but you're not necessarily at an enterprise level going to use it over a PIM like a Salsify, right? And so you have to, as you kind of level up, or even in the beginning stages, what is the source of truth for what pieces of data? And if it's not the source of truth, then you should be thinking about like, well, what needs to be in there? Is it just a replication? Do we only need to replicate some of that data so it's not kind of convoluted with all the data all the time? So a big part of figuring out how all this stuff should work together is which systems are the main source of truth that has to be, if I need the answer on something for that thing, which system do I go to? And a lot of companies just haven't thought through this, or they've did that 20 years ago and it no longer makes sense in omni-channel. And you have Feedonomics and you have marketplaces, you have so much more channel, complexity now than you did, when they maybe started.
You're opening a can of worms there with marketplaces and ad channels. Maybe
I had to plug Feedonomics, for you guys. I think it's a undervalued part of BigCommerce. So
we understand the value here, that's for sure. So this has been fantastic. If you were to advise, let's say it's one of those mid-market customers, maybe they're growing rapidly, right? They've outgrown their current systems. They're looking to, maybe they're going to be implementing a PIM. They're going to be implementing maybe even a new ERP, moving off of maybe a QuickBooks, and they're implementing e-commerce. How do they start thinking about bringing those together? What's their starting point?
So it's funny you say that, because a lot of our B2B projects right now are being they're coming to us because they're realizing they need to upgrade their ERP and some of their back office systems. And then they're like, well, I have to do that. Maybe the website was built on an old ERP and they're realizing that's not going to work. And so it's kind of forcing them into this full digital transformation of e-commerce and back office. And so if I was a mid-market company, I would take my time, because I think this is a 5 to 10 year decision. And even 5 is, I think, on the low end in some cases, where like you really want to be like not changing your ERP for 10 years probably, and potentially even your e-commerce platform. Obviously, it can be tough to predict that far into the future, and the platforms are constantly changing. So I would really do a pretty thorough vendor selection. But I think that what people do mistakenly do in vendor selection is they just go to the vendors and they don't spend enough time talking to the service providers in the ecosystem in that of those vendors. And no, you guys are one of my favorite vendors. So, but in general, I will say that SaaS vendors are very good at sales, but they're often, leaving out some of the details of maintaining the systems and what it's really like, 5 years into running the platform, right? And so if I was a mid-market company, I would really be spending and trying to kind of figure all this stuff out. I would be spending quite a bit of time talking to people like Trellis, people on the ERP side, but not just the vendors, but also the agencies and the vendors associated with them, to get a better picture of how everything, because you're going to need both, right? It's unlikely you're going to do everything yourself,
I like that. Start with the vendors, the ecosystem, understand maybe blueprints for success that have worked before for similar businesses like yours.
I'm going to add. I want to add one thing to that. I think the ecosystem is so important to these mid-market merchants, and I think that's one of the things that BigCommerce has been doing incredibly well. But that would apply to the other things they're looking at, and if it doesn't have a good ecosystem, that's a red flag to me.
I like that. If they don't have a good ecosystem of partners who are implementing, and technology partners that they integrate with,
integrations. Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Well, Isiah, thank you so much for joining us today. I am sure our audience has gained so many insights and now knows how to plan their next integration project. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.